I have been planning the trip for almost a year, secretly, carefully, with the kind of focus people reserve for rebuilding something sacred. Italy, the land of her dreams, the country she talked about since we were young, when we still made bucket lists and believed time was infinite. I wanted to take her there because I believed that sometimes you could fix love by reminding it where it began. Emily had been my everything for 15 years, my anchor, my balance, the person who steadied my restless mind. But lately, she'd become more like a photograph in a frame. Still there, still beautiful, but distant, behind glass. We weren't broken, not exactly, but we were cracked in the quiet way that only people who once loved too hard can be. So I planned the trip. I imagined her face when I told her. I imagined her laughter returning, the sparkle in her eyes that had dimmed with time and responsibility. I thought I could bring her back to me through gestures, through perfect timing, perfect places, perfect intentions. When I told her about the trip 3 months before our anniversary, she smiled that polite smile she used at dinner parties. Italy? She'd said. That's amazing. But her eyes had flickered for a second like she was searching for the right emotion to perform. I ignored it. People get tired. They get stressed. She'd been working long hours, managing new clients, carrying invisible weight. I told myself the spark would come later when we were walking through cobblestone streets and sipping wine by candlelight. I refused to see what was already there. A woman trying not to drown in guilt. The night before our flight, I suggested dinner at our old favorite restaurant, the one with dim lighting, piano music, and the waiter who always remembered we liked the corner booth. It was the same place I'd proposed to her 17 years ago. I wanted it to feel poetic, like we were circling back to the beginning. She hesitated before agreeing, but she came downstairs that evening in a black dress I hadn't seen in years. For a brief moment, seeing her framed in the doorway, my heart forgot everything it had been worried about. She was still stunning, still the woman who made me forget entire rooms. We drove in silence, though not the comfortable kind. The kind where every red light feels longer, every glance feels like a question. The restaurant was busy, couples laughing around us, the soft hum of other lives filling the air. I ordered a bottle of wine she used to love, a red she once described as tasting like comfort. We talked about small things, the neighbors, her latest project, how much the city had changed. It felt like we were performing a play we'd done too many times before, the script memorized, the emotions missing. Halfway through dinner, she put her fork down and folded her hands on the table. Her eyes didn't look at me. They looked through me, like she was bracing herself for impact. "Mark," she said quietly, "before we go, I need to tell you something." My stomach tightened. I thought maybe she'd forgotten to renew her passport or was worried about work deadlines. I smiled to ease her nerves. "You're scaring me," I joked. She didn't smile back. "I can't go," she said. I blinked. "What do you mean you can't go?" "I can't go on the trip." Her voice cracked on the word can't, as if saying it hurt. My first instinct was confusion. "You're sick? Did something happen?" She shook her head slowly, eyes glistening. "No, it's not that." A long silence. Then, so softly I almost didn't catch it. "I've been seeing someone else." It was as if the entire restaurant went mute. The clinking glasses, the piano, the laughter, all vanished. There was only her voice, echoing like a sentence I didn't understand. "What?" I said. My tone wasn't angry yet. It was disbelief. She swallowed, her hands trembling slightly. "I didn't mean for it to happen. It started after your mom passed. You were so distant, Mark. I felt invisible." I wanted to say something, but my throat closed around the words. My mother's death had left me hollow for months. I'd withdrawn, yes, but I thought she'd understood. I thought she'd waited. "How long?" I finally asked. Her lips parted, then closed again. 6 months. I laughed once, the sound sharp and bitter. 6 months. Half a year of lies. And you waited until the night before our flight to say this? "I couldn't keep pretending," she whispered. "Who is he?" "It doesn't matter." "It matters to me." She hesitated, then said, "Someone from work." I could see the shame in her face, but it didn't soften me. The irony cut deep. She'd always mocked office affairs, called them pathetic, said people use proximity as an excuse for cowardice, and now she was one of them. "You should have told me months ago," I said, my voice shaking. She nodded. "I know. I kept trying to end it, but—" I held up a hand. Don't say it just happened. That's what people say when they want to make betrayal sound like an accident." Tears spilled down her cheeks. "You have every right to hate me, but please know I never stopped caring about you." I stared at her across the candlelit table, the woman I'd built a life with, and all I could see was a stranger wearing her skin. I thought about the hundreds of little things we'd shared, birthdays, inside jokes, the way she hummed while brushing her teeth, and realized that somewhere in the routine of our love, we'd become invisible to each other. The waiter appeared to ask if everything was okay. Emily wiped her tears quickly and forced a smile. "Just fine," she said. I envied her composure. When the bill came, I paid without a word. The walk to the car was silent except for the clicking of her heels. The same heels I'd bought her last Christmas. She stood by her door, staring at me as if waiting for permission to leave. I didn't mean for it to end like this, she said softly. How else does betrayal end? I replied. She winced. I'm sorry, Mark. She got into her car and drove away. I stood there, hands in my pockets, watching her taillights vanish down the road until they disappeared completely. When I got home, her suitcase was still by the front door, the one I'd packed for her, passport on top, itinerary printed neatly inside. I sat on the floor beside it and opened the folder, reading the words I'd written on the cover. Italy, our new beginning. My chest burned with the irony. I poured myself a glass of whiskey and sat in the dark living room, staring at the photos on the wall. There we were, smiling in snapshots of a life that suddenly felt fictional. I tried to remember the last time she'd looked at me with real warmth and realized I couldn't. Somewhere between the bills and the silences and the grief, we'd lost each other, and I hadn't even noticed. Around midnight, my phone buzzed. A message from her. I'm staying at my sister's tonight. Please don't call. I just need time. I stared at the screen until the letters blurred. Time. That was all she ever wanted, and all I ever ran out of. When dawn came, I was still sitting there. The plane tickets were on the table, mocking me. Rome, Florence, Venice, the trip we dreamed of for years. I thought about canceling it, getting refunds, pretending it had never existed. But then another thought crept in, quieter, darker. What if I went anyway? What if I needed to see those places not as a husband trying to save something, but as a man learning how to let go? I looked at her passport again, her face smiling faintly in the photo. The woman in that picture wasn't the one who'd confessed last night. She was someone I used to know. So I made a decision. I booked a single taxi to the airport. I packed my own bag, left her suitcase by the door, and wrote a note she'd find when she came back. You can have the house. I'll take the silence. I didn't know it yet, but that trip would change everything. The morning flight was half empty, the kind of quiet plane ride where no one talks and everyone pretends to sleep through their own unraveling. I sat by the window, the pale dawn spilling across the wing, my mind echoing with her words from the night before. I'm seeing someone else. I kept hearing it in her voice, calm, apologetic, almost rehearsed. I wondered how long she'd practiced saying it, how many times she'd looked in the mirror and imagined my face falling. I'd tried to imagine her waking up in another bed, her hair messy the way it used to be for me, her laughter filling a space I'd never step into. The thought hollowed me. I closed my eyes and pretended the plane was flying me somewhere new, somewhere without her shadow pressed into every memory. When we landed in Rome, the air smelled different, warm, alive, the faint scent of espresso and old stone. It should have felt like magic, but everything beautiful felt dull without her. Still, I went through the motions. I checked into the hotel I'd booked for us, a suite overlooking the river, 2 wine glasses waiting by the window, her favorite flowers on the table because I'd arranged for them in advance. I almost laughed at how pathetic it was, a man trying to romanticize his own heartbreak. I left the flowers where they were and walked until my legs ached. The city pulsed with life, scooters buzzing, street musicians playing, lovers holding hands. Everyone seemed to be paired, orbiting around someone else's gravity. I felt like a ghost watching the living. That night I wandered into a small restaurant tucked behind an alley. It wasn't the fancy kind we'd planned to visit, but it smelled like real food, honest and imperfect. The waiter asked if I was alone, and when I nodded, he smiled sadly and said, "Sometimes that is good." He brought me a plate of pasta and a glass of wine I didn't ask for. I sat there listening to conversations I didn't understand, letting the language wash over me like white noise. For the first time in months, no one expected me to speak. No one knew me. It was both comforting and terrifying. Halfway through my meal, I noticed a woman at the next table sketching in a small notebook. She looked to be around my age, hair streaked with gray in a way that made her look both tired and radiant. She caught me glancing and smiled. "You look like someone who's lost something," she said in accented English. I smiled faintly. "Maybe I just look tired." She nodded knowingly. Tired people are usually the ones who've lost something. Her name was Sophia. She was an art teacher from Florence, visiting friends. When I told her I was supposed to be here with my wife, she didn't ask where my wife was. She just said, "Ah, so you are traveling with ghosts." We talked for hours. About art, about marriage, about how people promise forever and then break it without meaning to. I told her about Emily. Not every detail, just enough for her to understand the weight I was carrying. "You know," she said softly, "sometimes love ends not because it dies, but because it cannot breathe." I thought about that long after she left. The next few days blurred together. I visited the Colosseum, the Vatican, all the places Emily had dreamed of. At each stop, I imagined her beside me, her awe, her laughter, the way she'd tug my arm when she wanted a photo. And every time I felt that sharp sting of absence, like reaching for a hand that isn't there anymore. I started writing in a small notebook I bought from a street vendor. Not about her betrayal, but about us, our beginnings, our middles, the good things I never wanted to forget. I wrote about the way she used to trace circles on my wrist when we watched TV, the way she hummed Sinatra while doing laundry, the time she cried when we adopted our dog. Pain has a way of reminding you how much beauty you once had. By the fifth day, I began to feel lighter. Maybe grief really does move in waves. You can't fight it, you just learn to float. One afternoon, as I sat at a cafe overlooking the water, my phone buzzed with a message from her. Are you okay? I stared at the screen, debating whether to answer. Part of me wanted to ignore it, to let her wonder. Another part still wanted her to care. I typed back, I'm in Rome. It's beautiful. You would have loved it. She replied quickly, I'm glad you went. I didn't think you would. I didn't answer after that. Some conversations don't deserve a second line. That night, I returned to the hotel and found an envelope slid under the door. No name, just my room number and handwriting I didn't recognize. Inside was a sketch of a man sitting alone at a restaurant staring out the window. At the bottom was a note. We're all travelers. Some just lose their maps. It was signed. I smiled for the first time since the dinner. I pinned the sketch to my notebook. Maybe people cross our paths not to stay, but to remind us that the world keeps moving. The day before my flight home, I took the train to Florence. It felt impulsive, but something about Sophia's city called to me. I wandered through narrow streets, listening to church bells echo between buildings older than anything back home. I stopped at a small gallery drawn by a painting in the window. It showed a man standing on a bridge, looking down at his reflection in the river. The caption read, What remains when everything else goes? I stood there for a long time. When I finally went inside, the artist turned out to be Sophia. She looked surprised, but smiled warmly. You came? I nodded. I didn't want to keep traveling with ghosts. We talked again, this time about forgiveness, how it's less about excusing others and more about setting yourself free. She said, Love doesn't always survive, but that doesn't mean it wasn't real. That sentence stayed with me. We had dinner that night, two people who had both lost and learned. She didn't ask about Emily again, and I didn't mention her. For a few hours, it felt like peace. When I finally returned home, the house was dark, exactly as I'd left it. Her suitcase was gone, the closet half empty. On the kitchen table sat an envelope with my name on it. Inside was her wedding ring and a note. You were a good man. I just stopped being a good woman for you. I hope you find the light I couldn't keep. I sat there for a long time, holding the ring, realizing that closure isn't a clean ending. It's a slow acceptance that some stories end mid-sentence. Months passed. I started running in the mornings, picking up old hobbies, learning to cook properly instead of just heating leftovers. I stopped expecting her to call. I stopped checking her social media. Healing wasn't dramatic. It was small and repetitive, like teaching your heart to breathe again. One morning, a postcard arrived from Italy. The handwriting was hers. It said, I saw Florence through your eyes. I finally understand what you wanted for us. I'm sorry. I didn't reply, but I kept it. Not as a memory of her, but as proof that even regret can carry kindness. Years later, I went back to Italy, not for escape this time, but for closure. I visited the same vineyard I'd reserved for our new beginning. They still had the table saved under my name, even after all that time. I sat there alone, drinking wine that tasted like endings and beginnings at once. The owner, an old man with kind eyes, asked if my wife was joining me. I smiled and said, She's already been here. He didn't question it. He poured another glass and said, Then drink to her anyway. I raised my glass to the horizon, to all the things I couldn't change, to the love that once was and the man who survived it. For the first time, I didn't feel pain, just peace. And maybe that's what love is meant to leave behind. Not forever, not perfection, but peace. When I flew back home that week, I felt something I hadn't felt in years. Gratitude for the trip, for the heartbreak, even for her confession. Because in losing her, I found the version of myself that had been buried under years of compromise. I learned that love isn't about saving someone else. It's about knowing when to save yourself. And every time someone asks if I'd ever go back to Italy with someone new, I just smile and say, no. That trip was never meant to fix a marriage. It was meant to fix me.
Crazy Reddit stories, wild twists, and real drama. Subscribe, comment your take, and stay for the next tale.